So Cocky is one of the core teachers at the ArtScience Interfaculty and co-founded Foam Lab, which is in Amsterdam. Her work considers synthetic spatial compositions in relation to the human body. And something which I think will be my first question, and I'm going to sit down, is that in the descriptions of your work, you talk about how instead of thinking about how we move through space, but how space moves through us. And I thought that was quite a nice thing to begin in relation to this.
Oh, maybe it's difficult to answer that. Maybe it's also what Renske said, to turn also the perspective. So from yourself, how I move through space, it's often how I move through space, but I'm more looking at space and how it moves through you. So even through every particle. So if your shoulder is a bit stiff or so, then there's not so much space moving through you. And yeah, I think that gives another complete perspective on how to navigate to space also. So, and space is something which can be created. So if something is not moving, how can you make space moving? I'm very vague, sorry.
No. Okay, that's, I'm going to presume that most people have seen the installation or the exhibition. And one of the interesting things that I've had in following it is the shift from sensing the shipyard to sensing the place. Can you talk about the process of the collaboration and how, like, the kind of, not problems, but the things that came up where you had to adapt? So, like, yeah, not being able to recreate the shipyard and changing it to the place is one of them. But I just, all of you.
Yeah, okay. I think it's more, we started with a place which really inspired us. So together with Nicky, we start scouting places here in Amsterdam North. So we came to this shipyard, and we also both so excited about it. And we went to many places, and this was like, this is so amazing. So we should start working here. So the whole process is we bring the students to that place, and we should just start working here. While we also knew sort of we can't bring the audience here. So what's the sense actually to work here? That was, so, but you just step into this process, and the interesting thing is I had no idea of any outcome. Like, is it going to be a walk? I have no clue. So really not. And so for me it was a bit, normally if I work on my own or with a few people, it's no problem. But now, like, oh fuck, I'm with 10 students, so I'm also responsible for them. You know, where are we going? I have no clue. But I think in the end, yeah. So you just start with something what inspires me or you, and then it inspired all the students, and from there the whole process started. So we gave little assignments, like going back to the academy to make small sketches or prototypes, but really quick. And out of that immediately came things that were so interesting. So from there, it's only like a ship, only stirring from behind. So I'm the only thing we did is following from behind. So from their works, I slowly saw a space dooming up. Because it could have been a walk or something else. So I was inspired by then, and then slowly I see something emerging, and then we went to the finding a location here in Amsterdam North. And again, we found a shabby, loungy taxi company, very shady. And it was like coming into that place, it was like, ooh, it does something to you. And we went to different locations. It was like, no, this is the one. That one looks more pretty, but no, here it's going to happen. And then we invited all the students to come and directly working from the space. I asked them, so what do you see in front of you in that space? And so we spent just 1 hour on it. So so they were, oh, I see this, I want to do this, oh, I want to do this, do this, do this. And actually it all came together already in that moment. And from then on, we just made it.
And I think also we tried not to, we set some frames, but we wanted them to fill in. So they were also more involved and really from the get-go that they could think of their own fascinations and use all their senses. So on the shipyard, we recorded in all these different kinds of manners, with hydrophones, with microphones, with the touch microphones for the tactile sounds, the samples. And so we also left it open for them, for like, first take your time to get adjusted to the immensity of the shipyard, all these experiences, this sensorial input, but also sensorial overload. And then let it filter to find your note or sense that you want to work with, and transpose again to this other place, this that is not connected anymore to the shipyard, but yeah, so it's 2 separate programs. So in November we went 2 weeks to the shipyard with all the recordings and really letting it sink in. And then the second part in February was they worked on it still in duos on several notes or senses. And then the last 2 weeks were to come together in the space and also make it one sensorial walk, so that all the works are more fused or linked together.
Working with 10 students is quite like different people have different processes. What were the kind of, was there any obvious ways in which, I mean, you were like facilitating them, I guess, in your own process of like what your, like these kind of sensorial journeys. How is it working with all, like the collaborative process of working with so many different people and then being able to understand what maybe what your own process was? Any like back reflection on what your own work is? I don't think I need to reword that question.
No, I can. It's an interesting question because I approached Cocky also because of her artistic process and her way of working, and I came as a guest to test the landing site and give feedback, and then we also had many discussions in the beginning, like how can we make a collaboration in which your way of working is extended to a group of students, and without enforcing it, but like in a more process-wise research project. So I was also wondering, like now you're doing a project in your way of working, but with a distance, how it is for you to, with some distance, to see, did things occur to you, or like, yeah.
I think, reflecting back, I think I'm pretty much surprised, or so. It was really like in my own work, a complete work of unfolding. All the time, things unfold, unfold, unfold. So nothing was targeted in a straight line. I want this, I want that. Yeah, that's the main thing. But for me, yeah, I'm surprised actually myself. So I stepped in a process I had no clue. So sometimes I was a bit like, oh. I don't know. I was all the time, I don't know. But it's the same in my own work. I don't know. But it's more all the time staying alert. So just standing and sensing. So actually I was just sensing the students more than sensing a place or so. And then it's like, oh, that's interesting, yeah. And I don't know how it happened, but it became a complete unity, everything. So maybe the students were my material. They didn't know. Maybe there's one of the students who wants.
They're also here in the audience.
Maybe they can say something about it. How it was for them.
Would you like to say something about this, how it was for you? First of all, I would also like to name the names of the 10 students who worked on this, because they really worked hard on this for the last 4 months. So Anna Oosting, Annie Nops, Catharina Ostraya, Vaki Park, Jesus Canuto Iglesias, Misha Lind, Sofia Bulgakova, Surya van der Weijgaard, Vera Kaleva, and Junchi Cho. Those are the 10 students that worked really hard on the project Sensing the Place. So, yeah. But some of you are here. The rest is already starting up the project. Is one of you? Would you like to say something about how this process was for you? Do you feel up for it? Yeah.
Well, because I'm in a second year bachelor, it's actually was one of the first projects that I was working with different people, and we were working on one big outcome. And I must say that it was a really great experience. And the most important thing was that the place itself, the Damen, inspired us so much. So it was from the beginning we felt I think we all felt the unity of the space. And even though we all have different backgrounds and different focuses, it's still sort of it felt like we are completed from the beginning. And it was really amazing to see how different people were gathering different materials, but at the same time it had the same feeling. So we were like just in the same flow. And actually I think that it helped us a lot, because we were sensing not the place itself, but we were also sensing each other. And I think it's also because of the Nicky, Cocky and Renske, all the teachers, they actually helped us not to choose like something, to choose one direction, but be really open to everything. And we were hardly working on all our senses, and we wanted public also experience those senses that we actually sense in the shipyard, and because it's a completely different experience. And I think it went pretty well, because we are still sensing it, even though we know our works. Even though we know our works, it's still being there every day is something different, and also we discover new things. With the public, because of course public has a different view, and we discover more and more still, and I think it will always be with us.
So that was also one of the starting points, that we wanted to approach this as an experiment that is a process and not has to be finalized in like a finite work from the start. And also, since you're working with sensorial works, like Renske said, with affect, then for them it's also quite important this weekend how the audience reacts. Like, you're not explanatory, you're not writing what is it, what you should do. And so for them it's also quite, I think, valuable to see how the people reacts and what works, and without being too explanatory. And so in that sense, it's a process that is still developing. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask one more question about, so it talks about the human presence in relation to these enormous living machines. And how does that work in both in mapping, but also in the way that you experience these places? Like, was this part, I mean, I'm talking for a little bit about why you chose the shipyard in particular, the kind of like industrial landscape, but also in thinking about these kind of spaces in relation to our body and how we experience them, because you're talking a lot about how you kind of were relating to each other and your each other's presence, or like the students, and how you see that as different to the machines or the
Well, maybe I start and you also can say something about the mappings. So when we entered the shipyard, one of the things that immediately struck us was that the sense of scale and the difference in it. So the machines are larger than life, and we were allowed to go into the dock and walk under a ship that was being repaired, which is a really weird sensation if you're walking under such a huge cruise ship. So this sense of scale, that was really, that struck us at first, and all these machines were moving and being alive in a sense. So this was really what felt like a very rich environment to walk through. And maybe you could say something about the mapping aspect of this.
Well, I think we also choose the shipyard because we were looking for a different kind of environment. I was talking about this overwhelming effect, and of course, in an urban environment, we know this already, so we're already a bit used to it. And a shipyard brings a different way. And then starting to focus on all these tiny perceptions and all these small experiences, and just stay really close to your own body, actually helps you to navigate through it and to work with it. And I think we also used the mapping exercise to get back to that even more, and to realize, okay, I've been sensing this and this and this, but actually this for me was the most important part, and I will go from there, because otherwise you stay overwhelmed. There's too much. But if you start to focus, I think this will help to make this relation between the big scale and the small scale, and also to each other. I really like your explanation in this, that, you know, we were focusing on sensing, and not only the environment, but apparently you also start to more, I don't know, be sensitive to the whole creative process as a team. So.
Yeah, maybe in the lineup I want to add one more thing. So I think also for me personally, but I think it also resonates to the whole group. In this shipyard, you imagine you're going down the dock. You're standing at the bottom of the ship. You can't even see the top of it. And it had this shape. And it's leaking water from the eye still in it. So you become like an ant. You become so small. And then you really feel the relation to the whole world. And the ship. And all the men working there, so they were from all kind of countries. So it felt like a complete other world. So you felt the relation here in Amsterdam North at the eye, this huge scale. You felt like a tiny part of a huge system, and you start to ask immediately all kind of questions. So I think that was really interesting. Yeah.
It's also one of the it's quite interesting that the shipyard is still here. It's quite it's Amsterdam North. It's next to the eye. I think they have this contract till 2030, and then, you know, probably speculation the ground is valuable much. But it's situated in the middle of a living area where the workers are living or used to live when they were working there in the past, and so it's really like a authentic place, not like the Rotterdam harbor where everything is automated. No, people are still like hand painting the ships, and so and the people working there had been working there for like 30 years or longer. Of course, not all of them, but a large group was. So it also felt like a really authentic place, and also you saw also the collision between the shipyard and the fact that it's actually in the center of Amsterdam, one of like a really busy city. So what they did, if they were grinding or repairing a ship, they would just hang these ordinary nets that would catch the fine dust, so it wouldn't go into the living area. Felt really, like a place that you can also really connect to still. Although the skill is non-human, the humanity there was quite human. And I think Renske also asked the students to make this intensive map to sort of relate to the place in a different sense, to look at it in a different way. And we asked them to make maps that could be published in the zine, but also some people made more like a video work map out of it. And I wanted to show one of them.
Not all of them.
This is by Vera Kaleb, and she also worked with this sense of scale that she was looking more into the micro scale. So for her it was quite interesting that you have these large big ships all from steel and these industrial smells, but then she would also find these organic things growing on a micro scale.
Is Vera here to explain what we were watching, what her map was, or would you be able to describe what that kind of what that map was? This kind of intense map of.
I think you can.
She's in the room.
Are you here? So you can come up. It might be nice just to, as an example of what these maps are. I know some of them are in the reader, but
Yeah. My name is Vera Chvalyova, but no one pronounced it good, so. Hi. I mostly work with small things, and I really like to work with the things that are always surround us, and those small particles that are actually really small to care about, but they're too big to ignore. And I thought this is the great possibility to go to the shipyard and just try to work with those kind of things, because for people who work there, it's completely another scale. And those particles, they're really microparticles. And from every place, so mostly what I did, I just went through our route, and I just gathered those small particles from different sides of the shipyard, and that I sort of composed the landscape. So how I would see the shipyard through the eyes of those small particles. And you can see I made, in this particular video, I made the 3 different worlds, and all those worlds consist of different places, so such as a machine room, the ship itself, small pieces of the ship. They're really small. Also the outside, also you saw some really organic things. It was moss that were actually on the ship itself, also under the ship. So I composed with all the small particles that I couldn't find through the old shipyard.
thanks. I think that's time. But if people haven't seen it, I think we should, I know that we've tried to explain it a little bit or go through the process, but it's something that you have to experience. That's the whole point of it. So obviously, please go. Yeah.
Are there questions from the audience or comments maybe before we wrap up?
Okay. Well, I was quite impressed the days before to see the exhibition. So thanks all the students and you for the beautiful output. And now that I got to know a little bit about the process behind, I'm actually interested because you use often the word intuitive, and I'm wondering if this intuitive intelligence and emotional intelligence that it's been connected with the process itself of the art making of the artwork is. And also the fact that the sensor, the fact that the sensoriality put the actor, so the student itself, in a process of activating themselves and perception the space from their perspective. If this leads to a more kind of a collective landscape instead of replacement of a venue. I mean, when I was at the exhibition, they asked me, "Did you figure out this is a shipyard, is a specific venue?" And I was like, "No, not necessary, because." The experience of a space is a kind of post-apocalyptic, post-rave landscape, but at the same time as something familiar, something that is connected with a common experience. So I'm wondering, sorry for the long question, but I'm wondering if this kind of process to be open, to be really like intuitive in the process making, leads to a possible collective landscape instead of a specific replacement.
It's a good question, because it was also all the time my question. Like how can this come together? How can we together create a kind of a world or environment, instead of this is this work and that's the work of that one and that's that one, and how do you do that? So then I asked Renske, like, that's really my question. So how can you sense the shipyard then? And then Renske said, well, maybe that's the overall thing. The language we had together was, do we sense the shipyard in the work somehow, in it, and we recognize that in each other's work, and that made it kind of a unity. For the audience, it's not important to know. But how do you come to a kind of a environment with so many different works or so, that it's still one whole thing? So I think that's how we sort of did it. Maybe Renske can add something.
Yeah, I can add one thing, and that is working intuitively doesn't mean you stop thinking. So yeah, you use both systems
At the same time.
At the same time. Yeah.
They inform each other, yeah.
Okay, we have to wrap it up because we're already running late. Thank you so much. And I hope you will have a chance to see it today if you haven't. And we're going to go on to the next presentation.